Okay. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Hi, I'm Josh Steffler with WeAreChangeVictoria.org and Freedom Free for All TV. I'm here with Dr. Tim Ball, renowned environmentalist and climatologist. Dr. Tim Ball, I wanted to ask you a few questions about the upcoming election and what your thoughts are.
We're talking about the BC election.
The BC election, yeah. I think we both have a fundamental understanding that this whole climate change issue is blown out of proportion. We're not all going to die. The seas are not going to rise and flood us out. I think we can see the ocean from your house here, and I know I can see the ocean from my house. I'm not concerned about it in the least. That's not to say that we don't care about the environment. Right. You know, there are real pollution agents out there, such as mercury, heavy metals, pharmaceuticals that get excreted and into our watersheds, right? But I think we both understand it's silly to worry about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, problems are only problems if you're not aware of them. Mm-hmm. And one of the problems with this focus on CO2 and climate change, I mean, the Minister of Environment for Canada came out the other day and they said they've spent $10 billion on. They could have spent that on real issues, the issues we know about, and spend it on defining better those issues and dealing with them properly. And of course, that's what happens when you play this alarmist game, that the priorities get distorted. And I always said, you know, the squeaky wheel gets greased, but it now gets greased with environmentally friendly grease. And of course, politicians are always looking for vehicles that can make them look green. They put on the cloak of green, as Elaine Dewar described it. The trouble is that they don't know the right problems. They don't know how to deal with them. They're just looking for votes, and people have very cynical views about politicians precisely because of that. And this BC election, of course, some of that's going to be there, particularly with it being the first province with the carbon tax. Completely unnecessary. And one of the things about that carbon tax was that it was brought in by the Campbell government through a climate action committee that was set up by Campbell. The thing that annoyed me about that was that Campbell had heard me talk to the BC municipalities. First he heard me in Revelstoke when he was not the Premier. And afterwards he came up and said, I want you to speak to my environment critic. And I said, happy to do that, because he said, I never heard any of the stuff you're saying before. So he knew what I was saying. A year later, I'm in Salmon Arm speaking to them again. Or it wasn't a year later, a couple of years later, but anyway. And Campbell was now the Premier. And of course, being a politician, he had that politician's memory for names and faces. And he came and asked me, he said to my environment critic, Cole, I think was his name. Anyway, he said, did he contact you? And I said, no. And he said, damn those people, when I tell them to do something, I want it done. The next thing I know, I got a call from his office. And he said, the meeting's going to occur in my office. So we got there, and of course, Mr. Murray Cole was there, and the Premier. And Campbell said, look, I can't stay for the whole meeting, but the meeting's being held here because I want to make bloody sure it occurs. And of course, I thought, fine, we're finally going to get some common sense. And Campbell set about in his first term, because he had a majority and he wanted to keep all his backbenchers busy, looking at government, how money was spent and what needed to be cut out, a good spring cleaning, which should be manifest. But then, of course, as all of these people do, they start losing public opinion and they start looking to things that are going to gain them favor. And of course, the climate issue came back onto his thing. And the next thing I know, they set up this climate action committee. And the major scientific information to that committee was provided by Andrew Weaver, who was a member of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So of course he comes in with all of these heavy credentials, and they produced the climate action plan, and in it, they say that the whole plan is based upon the findings of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Well, we now know that those findings are wrong.
Are wrong, yeah.
But on the basis of that, of course, they introduced smart meters. They introduced the carbon tax, and a whole lot of other controls. That I was on Main Island, they were very concerned because a group showed up, showed Al Gore's movie, and then said, you know, we're going to tell you how you can run your community and what you can do.
Mm-hmm.
They were even talking about banning cars on the island. And of course, people starting to see that this is just dictating our lives.
It's almost like a green dictatorship.
Oh, totally.
You know, more and more we're seeing that the climate change issue is being used to push social engineering and massive control grids like the smart meter. I'm sure that with you can almost see in the future that water is going to be the next big fear, and so we're going to be seeing smart water meters and controls on water when realistically we live on Vancouver Island. Most of our water flows right out into the ocean, and there's the problem with the centralized control, which is what a lot of these climate change activists and non-governmental organizations want, is centralized control. But really, a lot of the solutions can come from a decentralization and an empowerment of the individual.
Absolutely.
If we're concerned about water usages, it rains so much. Why are there not more people putting water collection spouts on their buildings, or all sorts of like private water collection? Why do we always have to rely on big government to save us? I think that's one of the biggest tricks that's been played on us, is that these non-governmental organizations and governmental organizations, unions, they all have convinced us that as individuals we have no power and that we're powerless. So we need to give up our power to a collective, to an organization, so that they can use that power to manipulate and control, when realistically the changes to the climate or the changes to our environment will be affected more by a million individual small actions rather than an overarching control grid like a carbon tax or a smart meter or a smart water meter, or more control, because people don't like to be controlled. We like freedom. We like the liberty to make our own choices, and we don't, as adults now, we don't need a big government nanny to tell us, oh, don't do that or don't do that. We feel that this choice is bad, so we're going to take that choice away from you and not let you have it.
Well, of course, the irony of it is that one of the original political phrases, I love them. Sustainable development was one. It means everything to everyone and nothing to anyone.
Yeah.
But one of the original phrases of the environmental movement, which started with the Club of Rome and so on, and the Agenda 21 was think globally, act locally. Well, let's really put that into practice. Let's let the local people act locally. But you see it, and I learned this from when I was on commissions or groups with the City of Winnipeg. In Canada, the tax structure is such that 34% of your money goes to the federal government, 18% to provincial, 9% to municipalities. But originally it was the other way around. And of course, who provides you with the most services?
Well, it's your municipal,
exactly.
It's the local.
Yeah, it's the local. Now, water, of course, and they're pushing this for several reasons. One is, as a sidelight of the climate change issue, they're saying, oh, there's going to be more droughts. But that's counterintuitive, because if you get more heat, you're going to have more moisture in the atmosphere, therefore less droughts.
And when you think of a greenhouse, you don't think of a desert inside a greenhouse. A greenhouse is humid, it's moist, it's full of life, and the idea that a few greenhouse gases is going to desertify our planet just seems so ridiculous.
Well, the desertification thing is being brought back. That was a threat that came out in the 70s. There was a drought in what's called the Sahel in Africa. And the Sahel is a region stretches right across. It's actually a transition zone from the tropical rainforest to the Sahara Desert. And it goes through periodic the vegetation's dying off, and the people are dying, and they blame the overgrazing by humans, and it's expanding the Sahara Desert. It had nothing to do with that at all, but desertification became the big buzzword, and Bob Geldof made a career out of exploiting that, and of course typically collected a lot of money, give it to the government, and none of it got to the people that needed it.
Well, there's a lot of middle guys and people that you got to pay off, and bureaucrats that need their cuts, and then. But
the BC in BC, you know what it's like with the forestry. I mean, what percentage of our total forest are we actually cutting? And it's a recycling of the forest, and we're very close to harvesting replanted trees now, because we started silviculture. That is the whole process of replanting trees, and so it won't be very long before we won't have to cut old forest. But all of these things are being exploited because people don't understand them, they don't know about them, and this election is going to be about exactly the same thing. And it's interesting, by the way, probably get into trouble for even mentioning this, but Andrew Weaver was recently elected as the deputy of the Green Party, and yet he's the guy that's promoted the climate action plan in BC,
and he was also involved in the Climate Gate scandal.
How much of that he was involved in, it seems marginal, but he certainly was working with those people, and he was certainly the editor of the Journal of Climate, where a lot of stuff was being published. But there's a real difficulty when both politicians, or bureaucrats, I should say, and scientists get involved in politics, because science, in its purest form, should be apolitical and amoral.
But it really hasn't been, especially with climate science, which is, like, really, I don't think that as humans we really understand all of the unknowns about our climate, and the idea that governments should be controlling the environment and controlling the climate to protect us is a terrifying aspect, because the amount of regulation and control over individual behavior to gain this control over the climate it seems despotic and tyrannical, and they cloak it in that cloak of green that we're doing it to save everybody, and then they'll tote the children out. This is our future. We need you to act on climate now so that we can have a planet in 30 years.
Well, there's an arrogance to it, and of course I used to tell my students, I tell audiences still, I love snowflakes, because you know, here we've got this great engine of industry and democracy, and the snow starts to fall and it grinds to a halt. You know, Mother Nature reasserting herself. I love that. And of course, when you look at the amounts of energies involved in the atmosphere, there's I believe the figures are something like 5 hydrogen bombs of energy in a single thunderstorm cloud. And I remember when the ozone issue was going on, and somebody said, look, we should create ozone and put it up and fill in the ozone hole. And somebody pointed out that it would take more energy than humans produce in total to produce that much ozone. So there's an arrogance to it. It's almost like children. We want to take credit for the messing things up. And so when a politician said we're going to stop climate change, it's so ludicrous. It's not even funny anymore.
No.
It's beyond funny.
But fortunately, more and more people are starting to hear stuff like this. More and more people are losing their fear of the bullying culture that comes out of this climate change, where if you aren't with them, you're against them. And if you don't believe in it, you are evil, you hate the planet, you are not green, you're selfish. And yet more people are looking at the science and realizing that the climate has always changed. It always has, and it always will. And humans have no right to regulate how much ice is in the Arctic. We can't control how much ice. There's no laws that we can put in place that are going to control how much ice is there. Like, should we go back to when Vancouver Island had, 100 kilometers of ice above us?
It wasn't 100 kilometers, but certainly it was a pretty deep amount. And enough to smooth out the rocks outside of the legislature here in Victoria. But and of course you see that manifest in geoengineering.
Yeah.
One of the things that amuses me, and I know your group have been interested in this, is the chemtrails. A lot of people, they see a condensation trail from a jet, which is perfectly normal. The jet's exhausting material.
Yeah.
Condenses into ice crystals and you see it. It then gets spread out by the wind patterns up there. There have been governments putting materials up there. The irony of it is that they're doing it with experiments to try and control global warming. So the people that are opposing the chemtrails are also demanding the government do something about global warming. When the government do something about global warming, they say, oh, you can't do that.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
So the contradictions, because they don't understand what's happening. Well,
and then with those contrails, chemtrails, there's also the unknown unknowns. Like,
oh, of course.
How are they don't know what's going to happen when they're putting stuff up there.
No.
These are all vastly uncontrolled experiments. And they're also experiments on us because while we can choose where we live and what we do, we can't choose what air we breathe. And if they're up there spraying something, and that's not to say that they are or that they're not, but it looks like it, and there are patents and people talking about it, we should have a say,
of course,
in what they spray over us.
But that's part of the underlying approach of the whole environmental movement is that these are now things affecting us globally. Therefore, we need one world government to deal with it. The truth is that's the worst thing we need, because that government will then do things and you'll have no say in it. That's what's going on in Europe right now. The people are rioting in the streets because they have no other vehicle to complain about what's been done in the banking system. They have no control on it at all, so. Britain talking about in fact, the party's going to get elected, probably the UK party, want to get out of the European Union because here are these faceless bureaucrats in Brussels dictating to them what they can and cannot do. And the minute I've learned a long time ago that the minute you set up something based around an idea, that structure, you've got to start tearing it down. I'll give you an example. At the university I worked at, we had a president that came in. There was no union or association or contract. And the president started negotiating individual contracts with individual faculty members. So those ones that he liked got better deals. And that kind of manipulation is just simply unacceptable in a fair and equitable society. And so he said, well, what choice do we have? Well, the only thing you can do is form a union. Well, and you form a union, and then you can get a first contract with the university. So I said, okay, fine. So I worked very hard to do that. But I knew the minute we formed a union, we'd create another problem. Okay? Because no matter what you do, there's always going to be some side effects.
Yeah.
You see it now. It's just laughable because people say, "Well, if I take this drug, what are the side effects?" Well, then you've got to say on the ad what the side effects are. People are saying, "Well, I'd rather have the disease than all the possible side effects." You know, this is stupid. Well, we got the first contract, and within a week, I formed a group to get rid of the union. People said, "You're nuts." I said, "Yeah, maybe I am, but I know that within a couple of years, the union will be dictating you worse than the president did.
Yeah.
And you'll have less control over that than you have over the president. Because the union's going to be around and the president's going to be gone." Well, sure enough, that's what happened. And so I think that what you've got to be constantly doing is monitoring any structure that you put in place. And I don't care what it is. I mean, if you start something with an idea, every year or 2 years you should go back and say, well, what was the original idea? How far have we drifted from that idea? Is the drift logical, acceptable, or is it now become a problem in and of itself? But what happens is that's not happening. And then the people that are controlling the structure that is disseminating the idea, they develop control. I'll give you an example in industry, and we've seen this in the last 30, 40 years. A company starts with an idea. Well, then to disseminate the idea, you have to have salespeople, you have to have manufacturing, you have to have a whole PR, and then you got to get accountants. Well, then the idea starts to lose its impetus. that, or somebody comes out with a competitive idea and so on. You see this with Apple or IBM and so on. And what invariably what they do is say, well, the sales are going down. Oh, well, then we better bring all the salesmen in and talk to them about it. But while they're in there, they're not making more sales. And then they make the fatal mistake of, oh, it's an economic problem. Oh, well, we better put the accountant in charge. You're as far removed from those ideas as you can get at that point.
Yeah.
You go back to the original ideas people is what you do. But of course you got rid of them. The companies that were successful in U.S. history in the last 40, 50 years were the ones that had their own research labs. Look at Bell. Look at AT&T. Look at IBM. Right? I mean, all of these, Apple with its own research and Google, and they're constantly with new ideas. You've got to keep that going because otherwise the structure will collapse in and of itself. It's the nature of structures.
Well, and then you also have the structure that's built and the people that build other things off of that structure that become dependent on that. So they, even though the structure itself may be fatally flawed, they'll defend it because they're now dependent on that foundation. And I feel that that's where we're at with climate change is that people have gone all in now. To use a poker reference, they're all in. So they have to keep pushing it, and they can't. You can't admit. You need to use fatalistic. Terrifying arguments that we're going to flood, we're going to all die, BC's going to be a desert.
But even more frightening, you start defending the indefensible, but more frightening, you ignore evidence that shows that you're wrong.
And that leads to actions.
Well, you see, one of the things that with the global warming thing was that it was a hypothesis. Somebody said, oh, CO2 is increasing, and if it increases, the temperature will run away and we'll have global warming and the planet will fry. And we know it's going to increase because human industry is producing more every year. And therefore we've got to have a whole climate policy and we've got to stop industry and everything else. But instead of, in science, normally what would happen with the hypothesis is the scientist would say, well, look, this is what I think is going to happen. Other scientists then challenge that. But what happened with this one was, and Richard Lindzen said it best, when the consensus was reached before the research had even begun, because the research would then test that hypothesis. They didn't allow testing of the hypothesis of global warming due to humans. And the IPCC was set up to prove it rather than to disprove it, which is the proper scientific way. And then they actually got away with attacking those scientists that tried to be scientists. They called them skeptics.
Or even worse, they use the term denier, which has its Holocaust connotations.
But what's interesting, Josh, is that the word skeptic has a completely different meaning for science than it does for the public. For the public, a skeptic is somebody who's, just turns his nose down on everything.
A cynic almost.
Cynic, exactly. Whereas as a good, healthy skeptic is what all scientists should be. So by using that term, saying like with me, they say, oh, he's a global warming skeptic. Good.
That should be good. In science, you want people constantly trying to disprove.
Okay, and what they've done with their computer models is when the model doesn't fit what nature's doing, they go back and it's now being called as tweaking to make the model fit what nature's doing. And say, oh, see, the model fits reality. No, it didn't. You made it fit reality. But then you say, well, okay, if your model works, then project forward. Because science is about prediction. If you can't predict, you don't have science. Your models, your theory's wrong. Well, the models have been consistently and absolutely wrong. And not just for, beyond 5 days. I mean, Environment Canada put out computer model predictions which are less than chance in their accuracy. But when we start looking at every prediction the IPCC models have made have been wrong. In fact, the models were so wrong so quickly, they stopped calling them predictions. They call them projections. So instead of dealing with the problem, they moved the goalposts. And of course we saw that when the global warming, the world stopped warming. They didn't say, well, the model's wrong. It's climate change.
Now everything's caused by climate change. Storms, that's climate change. Dry weather, that's climate change. Warm summers, climate change. Cold summers, climate change. Of course, the climate changes. So
exactly. But the issue about the water that you mentioned earlier in this province, we don't have any policies with regard to groundwater. If there are conflicts over groundwater, the current practice is to take them to the cabinet level, and they're dealt with at the cabinet level. And I've been on radio stations out of Merritt and in the interior and so on, because there you've got semi-desert, you know, from Osoyoos and up through the valley there, along the interior. It's in the rain shadow of the Rocky Mountains. This province has got extremes, so you've got some of the heaviest, well, the heaviest rainfall in Canada, up in the Henderson Lake and on the west coast here, and then you get to the interior and the driest. And we're not dealing with the province in terms of the natural realities of it, but and of course the problem is that because you've got a provincial government, it's got to be one size fits all.
Yeah. It's
the same thing as with Canada. You know, we've got to have what's the term? Mine's gone blank here, but you know, we've got to have universality of policies across Canada.
It's a homogenization of policy.
And it doesn't work.
No, because the people of BC are different than the people of Alberta, and we have different concerns.
Well, it's not just the people, but the whole geography is different.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, after the drought on the prairies in the 30s, they set up the Prairie Farm Rehabilitation Administration, which was a group that was dealt to help people deal with proper, you know, the conditions on the prairies, the only moisture deficit region in a large area. Quebec has consistently fought that. They said you can't have a federal agency for just one part of the country. Well, why not? Because, you know, the needs in Quebec are different than the needs on the prairies. The difference in different parts of BC are different. So this idea of one size fits all, which is what these people want, and particularly with water, it doesn't work at all. Because you mentioned on the island here, when Paul Kane came here in 1843, and he said, "Why are there so few Indians on the island?" And they said, "Well, there's no water in the summertime." And of course now we're trying to deal with that. As you said, it isn't that there isn't adequate water, but the water comes all at one time, or it's all in one place. And so it's identifying nature, the natural issues, the natural conditions, and then living to accommodate that, rather than trying to say we got to have one policy that fits the whole thing. Just simply doesn't work.
Okay, I think we got to wrap this up. Final question: Is carbon dioxide a concern to you at all?
Absolutely not. In fact, we need more of it because the plants are malnourished.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Tim, you're always a friend of We Are Change Victoria. I want to thank you, and hopefully we can do this again.
Anytime.
Yeah, definitely, because you constantly get harassed or bullied and named online as a climate denier. And
just a quick comment about that, Josh. I used to worry about that, and particularly my family, but an old Air Force friend of mine said to me, during the war, we knew that if the flak was really heavy, you knew you were over the target.
And we definitely are, you know. So you've got friends. You've got friends. Excellent. This is Josh with wearechange.victoria.org and Freedom Free for All TV. Check us out online for more information. Once again, Tim, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.